Hollywood is well known for its glitz and glamour, as well as countless scandals and entertainment gossip, but what happens when Tinseltown turns dark? On today's Most Amazing Top 10 list, I'll be covering some of the darkest moments Hollywood has ever seen. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have one of Hollywood's most famous actors ever, James Dean. He was Hollywood's bad boy, but he also had a passion for fast cars. On September 30th, 1955, when he was just 24 years old, he was speeding in his Porsche 550 Spyder when he unfortunately crashed into another car traveling the opposite direction and lost his life. When he died, he had only filmed 3 movies, 2 of which hadn't even been released yet. It's really sad to think about how much potential and how much more life he had to live before it was tragically cut short. To make this already dark moment a little creepier, just 7 days before his death, James met with celebrated actor Alec Guinness to show off his new car. Alec then told James, "If you get in that car, you'll be found dead in it by next week." In our number 9 spot, we've got the tragic murder of comedy legend Phil Hartman. Before I dive into this one, guys, make sure you hit that thumbs up if you're enjoying the video so far. In May of 1998, Phil and his wife Bryn got into a fiery argument about Bryn's repeated drug use. Apparently the argument was so bad that Phil told her he would leave her if she didn't stop using drugs. After the fight, Phil went to their bedroom to sleep, but Bryn had a pretty worrisome mix of substances in her system. She was drinking alcohol, taking Zoloft, which is an antidepressant, and had also ingested cocaine. In her intoxicated state, she ended up grabbing a gun, went into the bedroom where Phil was sleeping, and shot him 3 times, killing him. Bryn then drove to her friend Ronald Douglas's house and confessed to killing her husband. Of course, Ronald's initial reaction was disbelief, so the pair drove back to the house, but in separate cars. On the drive back, Bryn called another friend and confessed again. When the two arrived back at the house, Ron saw the body of Phil and immediately called 911. When the police arrived, they were escorting Ron and the 2 children of Phil and Bryn out of the house when Bryn locked herself in a bedroom in the house where she ended up committing suicide. It's a pretty tragic end to what was already a dark and upsetting story. In our number 8 spot, we've got the story of Carl Switzer. Carl was a child actor who got his start in the 1930s. By the time he was an adult, he had swapped out most of his acting for a more low-key lifestyle as a dog trainer and breeder. In 1959, Carl had agreed to train a hunting dog for a man named Moses Samuel Stilts. After the dog ran off and got lost, Carl offered a $35 reward to anyone who could find the dog and bring him back. When someone finally found the dog, Carl gave him the $35 and bought him $15 worth of drinks to say thank you. Several days later, Carl and his friend Jack Pyatt decided that Moses should have been the one to pay for the reward and went to the home he was staying at to confront him. One thing led to another and Moses ended up shooting Carl. Carl's death was on the same day as legendary director Cecil B. DeMille, so it ended up getting greatly overshadowed in the news and tabloids. Based on Moses' testimony, he was never convicted of the murder and it was ruled as an act of self-defense. But in a turn of events, 42 years later, on January 25th, 2001, a man named Tom Corrigan, who was Moses' stepson, decided to come forward about the true events of that night. Tom revealed that the story Moses had painted wasn't exactly true, and Tom even said, "It was more like murder." I'm not sure why it took him so long to come out with the truth, but I'm sure it would have been pretty scary for him to have been holding on to that for all those years. Coming in at number 7, we have the unsolved murder of William Desmond Taylor. William was one of the most successful silent film directors of the 1910s and the 20s. During his height as a director, the industry was beginning to shift from silent films into talking pictures, which were called talkies. On February 2nd, 1922, William was found dead inside his apartment. Because of the times and the fact that crime scene preservation didn't really exist yet, a large crowd gathered inside his home to look at the scene and the body. Someone who claimed they were a doctor stepped forward and began to examine the body before claiming that William had died from a stomach hemorrhage. When the real authorities arrived, this doctor had already disappeared and the investigation began. Authorities rolled over the body of William only to find that he had actually been shot in the back twice, which is what really caused his death. Did that supposed doctor have anything to do with the murder, or was he just really terrible at his job? Let me know what you guys think. When William was found, he still had cash in his wallet as well as other valuable items, so robbery didn't really seem to be the motive in this case. There were many suspects in the case, but because of lack of evidence and crime scene contamination, this case has been cold for almost a full century. I wonder if we'll ever really know what happened to William. Moving on to number 6, we have the story of 28-year-old actor Johnny Lewis. In 2012, Johnny was found dead at the home of his landlord, 81-year-old Catherine Davis. Police were called to the home after a few people who were at the home next door had been attacked by Johnny and then heard Catherine screaming next door. When police arrived, they found Johnny dead in the driveway, as well as Catherine and her cat, both dead inside the home. The investigation concluded that Johnny had killed Catherine's cat and then Catherine, and then climbed up onto the roof where he ended up falling to his death. A toxicology report showed that there were no drugs or alcohol in his system at the time of the death, which really leaves us with the question as to why this all happened. How does this seemingly normal guy just suddenly commit such an atrocious crime? While we will never know for sure, it is said that Johnny had a head injury that went untreated, so it is possible that this led to some kind of psychological disorder that could lead to extremely violent and angry outbursts. Coming in at our number 5 spot, we have a story about Loretta Young. In 1935, Clark Gable and Loretta Young were co-stars on the movie The Call of the Wild. They ended up having some sort of fling which left Loretta pregnant. Because of the times and the fact that they were unwed, this of course would have caused a major scandal. Loretta ended up leaving the country for what they called an extended holiday for the rest of her pregnancy. After the baby was born, she dropped it off at an orphanage, only to return sometime later and adopt what was actually her biological child. While she maintained the story that her daughter was adopted, as the child grew, she inherited her father's famous distinctive ears, which led to the public finding out about the truth. This is a dark Hollywood moment because it's just really upsetting that a woman had to jump through all of those hoops in order to be able to lead a successful career and also raise her child. In our number 4 spot today, we have the death of Thelma Todd. Thelma was an extremely talented comedic actor who ended up dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. On the night of her death, Thelma was out with friends for an evening on the town. Around 2 a.m., her driver dropped her off at her cafe where she lived in the above apartment. Thelma realized she was locked out, so she began to walk to her business partner and lover, Ronald West's house, which was just up the road. She went down into the garage and sat in a car, and little is known about what happened after. The next morning, her longtime maid came down into the garage to grab Thelma's car for her, which was their regular morning routine, but instead she tragically found Thelma slumped over in the driver's seat. The death was ruled an accident, and it is said that she turned the car on to warm up, but with the garage doors closed, she ended up accidentally poisoning herself and passed out at the wheel. Thelma was 29 years old at the time and was at the peak of her career, so seems pretty unlikely. She had no marks on her body except for a bruise on her lip, which is said to have been from hitting her face on the steering wheel. There's a lot of speculation that Ronald was involved in her death, and some say he even confessed to it on his deathbed, but all of these claims have never been proven. Coming in at number 3, we have the stabbing death of Johnny STOMP ANATO. In 1958, Johnny was found dead in famous actress Lana Turner's home. Lana's 14-year-old daughter Cheryl confessed to stabbing him, saying that he had attacked her mom after an argument the two were having. While the courts ruled that the killing was justified, this did not stop rumors from swirling about what people speculated really happened. The most common was that Lana had actually murdered her boyfriend, but her daughter took the fall since the court wouldn't be as harsh on a minor. But in a darker, even more upsetting rumor, people claimed that Lana had caught Johnny and her daughter in bed, which led her to kill him, and then made her daughter take the blame. I don't think that this version is true, or at least I really hope it isn't, but I obviously wasn't there, so anything is possible. In our number 2 spot, we have the story of Sid Vicious. Sid, whose real name is John Simon Ritchie, was a bassist and singer for the most famous British rock band, the Pistols. On October 12, 1978, an employee of the Chelsea Hotel got a mysterious phone call which alerted them to trouble in room 100. When authorities arrived to the room, they found Sid, who was extremely high on drugs, and Sid's girlfriend at the time, Nancy Spungen, dead in the bathroom from a stab wound to the stomach. Sid was subsequently arrested and charged with Nancy's murder. 10 days after this incident, Sid attempted which led him to getting sent to the Bellevue Hospital, where he later tried to commit again. He tried to jump out of a window, yelling something like, "I want to be with my Nancy," before being pulled back inside by hospital staff. On February 1st, 1979, almost 4 months after Nancy's death, Sid ended up overdosing on His friends actually ended up reviving him, but he passed away the next morning. After his death, his mother said that she found a note in his pocket that read, "We had a death pact, and I have to keep my end of the bargain. Please bury me next to my baby. Bury me in my leather jacket, jeans, and motorcycle boots. Goodbye." Sadly, this note wasn't found until after he had already been cremated, but even if it was found earlier, Nancy had been buried in a Jewish cemetery, and Sid wouldn't have been allowed to be buried there. It is still unclear what happened that night that Nancy died. Some theories include that a drug dealer had done it while Sid was out cold from the drugs he had ingested. Some think the pair really did have some sort of pact that really went awry, and of course some people really do believe that Sid was solely responsible, whether it was drug-induced psychosis or simply just a troubled young man committing a really horrifying crime. Whatever really happened, it is so tragic that 2 young people ended up losing their lives. In our number 1 spot today, guys, we have one of the most, if not the most famous Hollywood murders there have ever been. The murder of Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was an actor and model who was praised as one of Hollywood's most promising newcomers. Sharon lived with her husband, Roman Polanski, at a rental home in Los Angeles, and the two were expecting a baby together as Sharon was 8.5 months pregnant. On August 8, 1969, Sharon was having some friends over at her house while Roman was away working in London. Unfortunately, on this night, 5 members of the Manson family, if you can call them that, chose this house to target for their disgusting and evil plans. When these monsters arrived at the house, some of the most horrific acts ensued, which left 5 people, as well as Sharon's unborn child, dead. While I won't go into the details of what happened that night because there really just isn't enough time for me to do the story justice, I will mention that before the murderers left the house, they wrote "pig" on the front door in Sharon's blood. If this wasn't enough, the group of monsters went on to commit 2 more murders the next night on Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. While nothing can truly give justice to the victims, all 5 of the murderers were arrested and sentenced to death, until their sentences were commuted to life in prison after the death penalty was ruled unconstitutional in California. Some of them have died in jail, but some of them are still alive. They have all applied for parole many, many times, but are denied every time. Alright guys, that has been our list today. Thank you so much for checking it out. I've been your host, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you next time.